Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering One Piece, episodes 303 and 304. In these episodes, Luffy unveils his third gear power again. We actually get to see it in action. We aren't given an explanation, and I'm not sure if it's the same as the last power, but he looks like Popeye if Popeye were 40 feet tall. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Bernadette for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, these were really, really fun, you guys. I had a lot of fun with these. And I wanted to mention that I know there's a filler episode before 303. Or actually, I said that I'm covering 303 and 304. But am I? Or am I covering 304 and 305? I think it might be the next, aren't I? I have to skip this one. My bad. But I didn't get a chance to watch the filler. I'm going to. And I just wanted to let y'all know that I haven't. But these two episodes, we get to see Luffy unveil this like new power publicly. We saw him use it once in the tunnels, but he was behind a wall, so we didn't actually watch what happened. And it's such a weird thing because he becomes very small in that scene after he uses his ability, and I'm not entirely sure, even after seeing him use it publicly, what causes that. I feel like it's just that all of his bone mass goes to creating this larger thing, and so he can't, he can't create more bone than there was. It's just that he can reallocate it into a different shape and size, if that makes sense. And, I'm saying this with the understanding still that even if that were the case, the size of the fist he makes is far bigger than his body ever was. So I'm going ahead with, there's also the rubber aspect at play here. But I really can't... the way that it looked when he used the power, it doesn't appear that he's using the same sort of pressure ability from the Gear 2. But maybe he is, and I'm just sort of missing that connection. I'm sure it'll be explained, but I found it interesting. So, all right, we're going to start with 304. I was incorrect, my bad. And we start off with the Buster Call coming in, and they're coming in hot. And what we find out, this is really funny because I was sort of thinking that it was going to be saved as a surprise. And it's not really being handled that way. But what's going on is that Spandam is still on the Bridge of Hesitation. And he is still operating under this assurance that they would never attack him. That the bridge is absolutely safe. Because why would they destroy this? This is where Robin and I are. And it turns out that Robin is indeed a priority for them, but that they have a particular CP9 member that is assigned to be her escort. And Spandam isn't even mentioned. So they're avoiding bombing, basically, the Bridge of Hesitation on Robin's behalf, but not on his. And yet he cannot stop posturing and gloating over how he is so important and such a hero that they would never dare do anything that would put him in danger. And I kind of thought that we were just going to see him eventually realize he was wrong and get bombed after all. But they actually have a conversation about the fact that it's Lucci, and Spandam's name is not part of that conversation at all. So now I'm just really excited to watch Lucci get cut down to size, and not Lucci, Spandam, although Lucci also. And it's interesting because he says something about how this is just like how my dad said it would be. He said that, like, he had nothing to fear from the destruction of your island. And of course he says, like, you can't tell your kid they were definitely about to also take me out. I just managed to hustle my buns enough that they couldn't. That doesn't sound great. So, of course, that's what his dad told him. But, oh boy, it's about to go a very different way for you, sir. And the attack, like, from the Buster Call so far, there's a lot of damage being done. They are just firing at will, and we're getting commands from all the various captains talking about how, we are meant to completely take down Straw Hat Luffy and his 60 pirates. And I guess they're including the, at first I thought this was like a bit of a joke about the fact that Luffy is so overpowered that he seems like he's 60 people. But I think they're including the Frankie pirates in that and just playing it like Luffy's in charge of all of them, which honestly, when you come down to it, is probably mostly true. Like, they don't answer to him, but the Straw Hat Pirates would answer to Frankie, who I think would listen to Luffy at this point. So, yeah, all of these Marines are about to flee the bridge, and Spandam is, like, bragging over the fact that you guys don't need to leave. I am standing right here, and they would never hurt me, so you're as safe as it's going to get. And we see all of these clouds, like, of smoke raising above the buildings, and then we cut to Robin, and poor Robin is basically like having a PTSD flashback episode. She's just curled up and shaking and crying and sweating and saying, I don't understand how this is happening again. And I felt for her so bad. Like, she just truly, this is such a horrific thing to go through one time. And then to be here when this goes off again. I mean, it's just really not, it's rude. It's not fair. And I really felt for her. Like, she blames herself for everything, and I hate that for her. So we, of course, get a bunch of, like, flashbacks of her experience with this and the ships and everything being blown up, even offshore, as well as the island itself. And I had been like, I knew that they destroyed the entire island, but I don't feel like I had quite registered the image in my head of the island just having been covered in trees and that one giant tree in the middle. I don't think I had quite registered what it looked like once that was gone. And it's just like a mound. There's nothing there, It's truly very, very upsetting. So, indiscriminate cannon fire is what is called for at the moment. And as the attack continues, the kids down in the tunnels are each running, and they are both unaware of the water that is headed in their direction. And I had sort of had it in my head at first that they would manage to get out of the tunnel just in time to avoid the water catching up with them. But because of the way this universe works, where you can, like, fall hundreds of feet and still wind up okay, you can, be like, all kinds of things can happen to you, but cartoon rules do still apply in a lot of cases. I should have realized that they were going to be, caught up in the water and that they would still be all right, because that's just going to be fun to draw. Really, when it comes down to it, it's just sort of like, what would be fun to look at and what would be fun to draw. And I should have realized that, of course, they're all going to start swirling around in the water. It is absolutely going to catch up with them. And then we're going to have to figure out what to do from there. And honestly, the best I can come up with for them is that they get swept down the tunnel to the entrance on the other end, because the water is just like heading down the tunnel, and there seems to be only the one way up, which is, you know, if they get up there, the water level doesn't rise all the way to the top of the building. Like it stays at sea level. So if they manage to get carried by the current up to the other end, maybe they will be just fine. But the disadvantage there is that I believe the direction the water is going is carrying them away from the end that they were initially aiming to come out on, which is very inconvenient. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So first we have Zoro and Sanji, and they are running down the tunnel, and they've got Usopp with them, and he's like strung between the two of them on this makeshift sort of stretcher thing, and he has got a lot of injuries. It's the sort of thing where, as a part of me wants to think that Usopp is sort of milking this for all it's worth, because he is a bit of a drama queen and he is also a coward. But to be honest, I'm pretty confident that he has the injuries that he is talking about. At one point he says, I think I've injured all 6 of my ribs. And when Sanji says, you've got more than that, don't worry, he then starts to like up the number of ribs he thinks is broken. And it's getting, at one point, I think he says something like 100 ribs or 300 ribs. I really do enjoy an Usopp who has no idea anything about human anatomy talking about how all of his ribs are broken. So they're running down the tunnel. They are following behind Nami, Kokoro, Chimney, and the rabbit bunny, the rabbit cat. And because they're ahead, these guys are the ones that are about to hit the water first. So on the way, Sanji is talking to Chimney, and she hears the story about how, or I said Sanji, Nami. Nami is talking to Chimney about what happened with Luffy and the fact that he was somehow able to like break this entire tunnel down. And we get an image of him biting on his thumb to activate this, which I had forgotten that we saw that. No idea what that means or how that works. Nami is like startled to hear about this ability of his, but she doesn't say like that's impossible. She just says something like, this doesn't make any sense, which is not the same thing as that's impossible, which I appreciate. And as they're heading forward, they suddenly are like, wait, what is that? And they see this huge wave coming towards them. Nami is sort of squinting because she can hear something. And then they turn and like head in the other direction. I do like the fact that after seeing the water, they keep going forward for a minute, like they have so much momentum that stopping is a real problem. And in the midst of all of this, which I really do appreciate, even though I don't feel like it's super necessary for this section, they have that thing I was talking about last episode that I kind of wanted for like the overall island, where we get to see a simplified chart, sort of a map of where they are. And so we see like the tunnel itself and then the water coming down it, and we're seeing exactly like how far down the water has gone so far, with a little arrow pointing to the first group and who's in it, and the second group and who's in that. And yeah, they turn and start sprinting away from it. And then we go back up to Luffy, and he is still facing off with Lucci here. And the water is beginning to rise in their area of things. So Lucci says, well, now we're completely cut off. Nobody's coming up here. And this room is on its way to being submerged as well. So he jumps up to the weird, like, sort of escape hatch that's in the ceiling. And Luffy follows him. And I was genuinely surprised because as much as Lucci is... He has put things in place to fuck with Luffy in a sort of, like... Underhanded is the word I keep wanting to use. But I feel like the word I should be using is dishonorable. It's not really like exactly underhanded. It's more like he's resorting to tactics that I think are just like dirty pool. He goes up through this hatch and it felt to me initially like he was just running away. And I'm pretty sure, based on his, like, stance and the way he reacts to Luffy coming up behind him, that isn't what was happening. He just wanted to retire to a more comfortable area that was out of the reach of the water. But initially, I was like, is this bitch just fleeing? Is that what's happening here? So, of course, he has to take this moment to continue to taunt Luffy. And he is... The fight goes to another level here. He is talking about how everything that happened to your crew and to Nico Robin, I'm sure you're really worried, and is like trying to needle Luffy here, which it's an interesting thing because Luffy definitely is so protective of his friends that I think that needling, it makes sense in terms of what you would expect a regular person to react like, where this sort of talk would rattle them. But Luffy is just not like normal people. It's more like the increase of intensity of shit talking, if anything, means that he is the more focused on his goal instead of being distracted by it. Which is admirable, and also I really wish that I was that way. You know, it's like he's just taking advantage of a hyperfixation here. So I love that when he starts off on the third gear, before he does it, he says to Lucci, just remember, this is what you asked for. Because Lucci says something about how Luffy has presented no challenge. We cut back down to the tunnel. And Usopp winds up accidentally falling out of the sling, and somehow Sanji and Zoro don't notice. And they keep running, and Usopp has been sort of feeling like something's up the whole time. And when he's alone and laying on the ground, he's still talking to them because he doesn't realize that they've run on ahead. But he senses that something is weird. And at one point sort of puts his ear on the floor. And I couldn't tell if that was like actually meant to be him listening through the stone in the ground, or if it was just a coincidence because that's the way that he rolled over. But he is trying to tell Zoro and Sanji something's up. And these two dudes are continuing to run off without even noticing they dropped him. And then they come up against Nami and Kokoro, etc. I keep not mentioning Chopper as part of the party because he's still passed out and just tied to Kokoro's hat. Which honestly, him being just tied to her hat, I don't know why, but that cracks me up. And they very quickly realize what the fuck is going on. And Usopp is just yelling at them like, I told you guys something was wrong. If we had just stopped and run back in the other direction, we wouldn't be here right now. So back upstairs to Luffy. And Luffy, this fight with him and Lucci, the two of them is like, at this point, I was glad that like we move into the third gear because for a second I started to get a little bit bored because it felt like I had seen the same moves from them over and over and over. And once we transition into this and Luffy just, I can't remember what the name of the first technique he uses is called, but we definitely see something new from Lucci, and it's the pistol shot, or what is it? Finger pistol, but it's finger pistol sting. And then a little later he uses finger pistol sting Finger Pistol Fire Sting, I think, is the name of it. And I have a question for you guys, because like it seems as if there is a deal with these CP9 agents where they have different sorts of versions of the same ability, where it's got sort of subgenres. We've got Finger Pistol, and then we have like a couple different versions of it. I don't fully understand why they don't just pull out their most badass version right out of the gate. Like, or why, because the way he's saying Fire Sting and he's showing off his claw when he does it, I was sort of like, well, okay, Finger Pistol is already, in my opinion, pretty intimidating. So adding the claw to it definitely makes it creepier and like, oh, that's serious. But we saw, like, when you say Finger Pistol, I immediately think about the first injury that I think Luffy sustained from that attack. And it was about the intensity of getting shot. Like, it was pretty bad. And I grant you, Luffy is stronger now than he was when he was first hit with it. So the result is not going to be exactly the same. But what does Sting do that regular Finger Pistol doesn't do? Like, it feels like when he says Sting, it sounds, he's got an expression on his face like he's like, oh, I've got you now. This is the real shit. But I'm like, well, why didn't you just do that in the first place? And, you know, the flying Finger Pistol I get because he's doing it from afar. But when he's like, when he does the Sting one, I don't really understand the difference there. So I think I'm missing something. Unless the flying Finger Pistol and the Sting aspect are sort of the same, like one and the same. Regardless, though, when he comes at Luffy with this, and all he has to do is flick his fingers the way that you would basically flick the back of somebody's ear to just be very annoying when you were in like middle school. He lands pretty much every hit on Luffy, and we don't see any real damage. There's like a little bit of blood, but it's not anything dramatic. And I was really thinking that this was going to be a lot worse for Luffy than it winds up being. And I guess it's just that Luffy is increased, like the attacks that he has developed have also resulted in a stronger body, I guess, so that he can resist these things now. Because the flying Finger Pistol is, or not flying, the fire one, Fire Sting, which basically throws a little fireball at him. Again, why wouldn't you just like use that out of the gate if you can do that? But he goes flat on his back. Like, that really hits him hard. And he doesn't just stand there and withstand it. He manages to get back up again, which is enough to surprise Lucci, because he is thinking that like nobody should have apparently been able to get back up after that attack. But I wish I understood a little bit more what it means when the show is talking about like, oh, now everybody that like is part of the Straw Hats has gotten stronger somehow. I feel like I want a little bit more definition as to what that means. And I think the reason that I'm after that is because of Cradle and how clearly defined a lot of the like milestones for power are. It's not necessarily that everybody's using the same types of attacks or anything, but there is a really clear delineation between copper level and iron level and gold. And then obviously you get into gold and then it gets a little bit like murky, but then you go into Underlord and then that's like fairly clear. So I think that's part of what's sort of hanging me up here is like, I don't feel like I have a good idea of what Luffy is capable of himself anymore and what he is capable of withstanding anymore, because I just saw him take these attacks not that long ago and it really fucked him up, and now he's getting attacks that I would think are stronger, and that's why you're digging them out of the arsenal now. And they're not doing the same amount of damage. And so it's hard for me to tell, are they not doing the same damage because his body is more resistant somehow? Or are these just like slightly downgraded attacks from the regular finger pistol? Gus says, I believe Fire Sting, Fire Pick is anime only. As for why people don't immediately bust out their best move, it's usually just an anime thing. It only makes sense if there's a debuff associated with using the stronger move. What do you mean by debuff, Gus? Forgive me. I think that sounds like a video game term, and I'm going to assume it means like, yeah, you can use this, but then it needs to like recharge, or yeah, you can use this, but then you take a hit to your health or something. Is that what that means? This is a non-gamer girl here, if you couldn't tell. I am a gamer. I play a lot of Animal Crossing. So there. Anyway, okay. So I'm going to describe, because like Luffy bites his thumb, and then he sort of seems to like blow on it. And what he calls this is bone balloon, if I'm not mistaken. So I think what's supposed to be going on is that he's like somehow he says the power that moves from one bone to the other, but it's like he has expanded using his breath the certain parts of his body. And anyway, it doesn't really like make a lot of sense to me, but he takes a swing at Lucci here. And you guys, this is bad enough that when the hit lands, all of these Marines who are on the ground think that like there's an explosion that has gone off, because they're close to the bridge of hesitation. Just they're close enough that it's like a little bit harrowing that this fight is happening. And we see Lucci go flying out ahead of this fist. A fist that is the size of a couple of houses, I would say. Pretty easily a couple houses. So yeah, he goes flying, and that is the end of the first of these two episodes. But then when we come back to ourselves, because I'm seeing Lucci flying through the air, he's way off of the actual like tower itself, and I was thinking, oh man, is he gonna land in the water? Because, you know, he has a devil fruit power. Maybe we get to see a weird sort of ending where he gets captured in some other way, and it's related to the fact that he can't swim, which would be very interesting actually to see. I don't think that's ever happened before, right? Like a villain that has devil fruit powers, we've never seen them get taken down via water, despite the number of people that we have encountered on ships. So I wouldn't have been averse to that being how it goes. But instead, he lands on the deck of a ship because he went flying. And there is so much like dust and smoke from him crashing into this and from the tower itself just getting completely knocked down that at first none of the Marines can even like see through it to tell who he is. They don't know what's going on. And they are gathered around him with their weapons out, and they're like, what? Who is this? What's going on? And one of them says something about how he's a power holder. And all of them, I'm thinking like, I was thinking, what if the Marines and CP9 aren't super buddy-buddy? You know, we haven't actually seen them together that much. It wouldn't surprise me if the Marines had like a little bit of like a weird resentment toward them. And if they find out that it's Lucci, how are they going to react? I'm assuming that they're on his side, but what if that isn't the case? What if I get a little bit of a surprise? And they are about to attack this like, you know, nameless shadow. And then one of the captains interjects and is like, don't you know who that is that you're all pointing your fucking weapons at? That is CP9 member Lucci. And all of the guys, as they realize put their weapons down. And it's not just that they look like afraid. It's the shock of coming face to face with this guy. It feels like a lot of them never thought they would ever meet him, kind of thing. Like he's a celebrity. And folks like fall back and say, spare our lives. And there's a real sense of terror that I didn't understand when this is your own guys. Like, really, if you are allied with somebody who is this powerful and you're in the middle of a big fight and you run into them, most of us, I think, would be like, oh, cool. This extremely strong person who is on my side of things has arrived to save the day, kind of. And instead, they're all just like, oh my God, he's going to completely fuck us up. And I was like, I don't get it. What's happening? And then we get the backstory. So there was this other kingdom, and they were dealing with a ton of pirate attacks. And we get to see how, like, the battles went down and that a group of pirates eventually is able to take over the palace. And one of them takes all of these hostages and demands the throne in return for giving the hostages back. And this pirate king, by the way, I have to give my seal of approval, because he is pretty quintessentially piratey. This is like pirate design 101 in a way that I think could easily have wound up being sort of boring. But because we have seen so many weirdo outfits that are like almost like there's something about them when they are really that out of left field that I feel off balance. There is something really reassuring and comforting about seeing a pirate who really looks like, okay, this dude almost could have been like a Captain Hook type in a movie. Gus says, like, Luffy has a reason not to use Gear 2 right off the bat because it makes him tired faster. Okay. So yeah, that's how I was interpreting that, but I wasn't positive. Thank you. But okay, so this attack, the people are gathered and talking to the king, and the king is like thinking that he is going to give up his throne, but his advisors are like, sir, for the people, you can't do that. And he says, look, if we give them the throne, we can find a way to get it back. But if I let all of those people die, we're never going to be able to get their lives back. And I was like, honestly, that is a pretty good argument. But then it's very quickly followed up by one of his advisors being like, dude, do you know who we're dealing with? Like, what makes you think that we can actually believe what these guys are saying? I think what it is, he says, there are two dudes here. And again, when I'm talking about like quintessential pirate, we also have quintessential king here. Like long gray locks with the long beard. It's a very archetypal sort of look. But one of them is like, yeah, I just have a really hard time believing that even if you give them the throne, that they will release the hostages. We don't actually have any reason to believe they would keep their word. So then we have this guy from the world government arriving. And it's an interesting moment because he's like, send him in immediately. And this page says, yes, but as he says it, Lucci walks past him without being invited in, like he owns the place. And this is Lucci at like age 15 or, like he is very, very young. He doesn't have any facial hair yet that I can recall. No, he just has those wild eyebrows and shoulder length black hair. And he asks where the prey is. And when he says that, I thought, okay, we're just accentuating like how cold-blooded he is. But then I realized later, after what happens, he doesn't explicitly ask the pirates, like, location in a way that suggests I'm going to attack them. Prey could mean anything. And that's a real, like, that's an oversight on my part that I didn't really notice how pointedly neutral feels like the wrong word, but I feel like it works here. That word choice was. So he says, leave the rest to me. And the king says, please give the highest priority to the hostages' lives. And Lucci says, I wouldn't try to tell the world government what to do if I were you. And gives him a look. And in the king's head, he's thinking, why the hell do I find this kid so intimidating? So Lucci walks out of there. And he goes and crashes the party of the pirates. And he says to the head pirate, and I don't know his name, but it doesn't really matter, I'm here to arrest you. And guys, this pirate, I love his like weirdo eyes. And then he's got these mustaches that stick straight out in either direction. And they remind me of that French chef in Little Mermaid when he starts to go bananas trying to catch Sebastian to put him in to cook him, basically. It was just given, especially with his like wild teeth, all of this is just very good fairy tale type archetypes. But yeah, Lucci saying like, I'm here to arrest you. He laughs in his face and says, don't make me laugh, which you did already, but there it is. And a couple of giant dudes get in his way and say, you better beat it, kid, because we don't need any trouble from anybody. We run this joint. And they swing at him, and Lucci uses iron body, and their blades just completely like vanish. And I guess it's supposed to be that they hit him with the blades and they broke off, but it's a weird thing where it sort of looks like he just sliced the blades off at the hilt. So he gets captured here, and the captain is like, nice. We've got somebody who's employed by the world government, and we're going to be able to leverage you as well. So throw him in lockup with all of the others. And he gets sent to this weird sort of holding spot that's like it almost looks like a garage, but for boats. And I don't know what that's called, because I know a hangar is the thing for airplanes, but I don't know what you call it, because like a marina is the actual docking area. But what do you call like a building that, you know what I'm talking about? But anyway, he gets put in this building and he asks, first thing, are these all the hostages? And the guy in charge says, yeah. And then Lucci says, I see. And the camera pulls away, and we just see the shadow of him tearing through these dudes. And it's like a really sped up montage. And he killed every single one of these soldiers. And there's a real interesting moment where his eyes are like bright red. And I don't feel like we've seen that from him. And I don't know if that's just supposed to be like a artistic license to demonstrate that he is sort of like a monster, or if that is supposed to be part of a technique that maybe we haven't seen yet. But yeah, he killed all of these dudes. And at one point, the dude who's telling this story says something about how like, that's monstrous, even if it is for justice. And the captain says, justice isn't always warm and fuzzy. You better remember that. And I'm just like, what is the justice here, though? Like, I don't get it. And later on, in the flashback, Lucci says to, I think the king, or maybe it was the pirate, something like, they all laid down their arms and cowered in front of this pirate. And that is a huge crime. The fact that they surrendered and yielded. And I was just like, that feels like a really loosey-goosey definition of the crime. Like, it feels like if you're saying I'm fighting for justice and you have this sort of attitude, that you can just make up whatever on the spot and say it's for justice because this thing that I don't like is wrong. There's no actual law involved in this ruling of his at all. There's nothing to say that, like, we don't operate this way based on X, Y, and Z of our code, or the way that you're supposed to, like, summon help for when you're attacked by pirates. That wasn't executed properly through the channels, like, and turn it into sort of a bureaucracy thing. But instead, it's just like my personal definition of cowardice is enough to say that this is a crime and that they should die for it. Which, honestly, if that's the case, like, they were obeying orders. Were they supposed to disobey their commanding officer, who is their king? Because that is what they were told to do. And I'm really like, that feels like it would be a crime. If they were told to lay down their arms and yield, and they didn't do that, for me, that feels like it would be an actual crime in a way this isn't. So anyway, it's just, I think that what we're supposed to get from this is that when these people say we're doing XYZ for justice, we're supposed to be getting the fact that their idea of justice is like corrupt and so rigid as to be like almost illogical. And I feel like this example is not really helping with that. Like, I get what they're trying to do here, but if you think about it at all, it kind of falls apart. But that's fine. I just wanted to mention it because I was sort of like, wait, it's what? It's just that they yielded? But yeah, this is like, you know, this kid at this age doing this and killing all of these guys, and there's no hesitation in him. There's no sense of like remorse. He is just really like self-righteous, but in a way that isn't exactly, when I say self-righteous, I normally sort of picture like religious zealots. There isn't even that sense to him. It's just more like, the vibe I get off Lucci is, I am a person who lacks empathy, and I want to be able to like fight and kill. And I found an organization that is willing to employ me to do that. So I'm going to profess to, what's the word? Subscribe to their ideology just for the excuse to continue doing what I want, even though it doesn't really make sense. And if you actually got me to speak openly with you, I would even admit it really doesn't make that much sense. Like, I don't really think that he believes what he's saying here. But regardless, it is quite enough to like make all of the pirates quake in their boots. And the pirate king has them like shoot a bunch of cannons at him, which causes this weird scar mark like pattern on his back, which is what they use to make the flag later. So I guess this is a pretty new flag, this symbol. But yeah, he grabs this pirate by the throat and he uses finger pistol and just fills the man with holes. And that man goes down and the pirates flee. And we don't really see any of the like resolution after that, because I thought we were going to see him killing the king who gave the order to surrender. But no, it seems like it's just the men whose probably most of them took an oath to do what the king told them to do. They're the only ones who get punished, while apparently the king just like gets to keep on chilling being king, which is a pretty accurate assessment, I think, of what justice normally looks like anyway. So that's fair. So this is when we see Luffy coming out of the tower, and all of these dudes recognize him. I love one of them saying, I didn't think he'd be that fat, because when he comes out of the tower, he's like blown up into this balloon, and they all start shooting at him. And he says, bone balloon is tough. That won't work. So he, in midair, says, gum, gum, giant axe. And he literally kicks this ship into 2 pieces. And that really caught me by surprise, friends. I am not playing with you. I wasn't ready for him to kick a ship in half at all. And I'll say this, Lucci seems pretty caught off guard too. He manages to jump up onto the mast, but things are close right now. They're operating on this ship that's very quickly sinking, and both of them are devil fruit users, so they both cannot swim. So there is a lot of potential here for things to go sideways for either one of them. And I just felt so bad, because all of these Marines who just got caught up in the middle of this are on this ship as it's sinking, and these 2 absolute fucking maniacs are just going to town around them, and probably a lot of them have been killed by falling masts and whatnot. But yeah, this attack, at one point Lucci says to Luffy, it looks like all of the strength that you're using has eaten into your speed, because Lucci comes at him in a way that Luffy probably in other circumstances would have been able to dodge, and he does not get out of the way in time. So finally there's a bit of a lull, and we go over to fucking Spandam, who is really taking it for granted in a way that I don't feel is entirely appropriate. He's been watching this fight, I guess, and he is pretty sure that Lucci is going to come out on top. And honestly, this man deserves everything that's coming to him. It is so funny to me. He has been absolutely steadfast 100% of the time that he has nothing to worry about, that there's no way that these asshole pirates are going to get past his impenetrable CP9 team, that everything is so tied up that he has put some contingencies in place by putting a landmine on the stairs, but he doesn't even really need that. And he's out here watching Lucci, who granted is an amazing fighter, but he's watching this man getting, if not getting his ass handed to him, getting stood up to adequately by Luffy. Luffy is nowhere near in bad enough shape for Spandam to assume that he is going to lose. And yet that is what Spandam is doing, just by virtue of who Lucci is and how much he trusts that Lucci's badassery is going to be enough. And I can't help but just roll my eyes at this dude, because you thought everybody else's badassery was going to be enough, and look where that got you. Have you learned nothing? And the answer is no, he hasn't learned anything, because men like him don't learn anything, because that's just what they're like. So, backing up a little here, this admiral comes out, and he says, aim at ship number 4. And one of them is saying the 2 of them are fighting on that ship, so ship number 4 got wrecked. And this guy says, Lucci isn't going to die, so everybody aim at that ship and fire all cannons. And his second in command comes up to him and says, Vice Admiral, I'm sorry, but you can't be serious. There's 1,000 of our men on board that ship. And this dude literally just shoots that man in the head in front of everybody. I was also caught off guard by this, guys. A moment of indecision can allow vicious criminals to slip away. And we go to the guns, the giant cannons that are aligning on ship number 4, which you would really think from being cut in half by Luffy's foot, it would have sunk by now, but apparently it's like holding on pretty decently well. And the episode ends with the cannonballs like flying at the ship. And that is where it ends. So, yeah, it's a lot of action in these episodes, and it's not really like the biggest story in terms of human interest, I guess is the word I want, or character stuff is Lucci. And Lucci just turns up here as a fully grown like teenager, and we don't know his origin still, really. This is like the first assignment that he's been given, I guess. Maybe it's not. I say that. It's like a legend because of how, I think, enormous the casualty count was. But I have to assume this wasn't his first mission. I really want to know how Lucci became who he is, because I'm getting very, very strong early Jai Long vibes from him, for those who read Cradle. There's like a sense with Jai Long of more warmth that I immediately latched onto, despite not liking the guy. There was something to him that I was sort of like, I feel like you're actually not that terrible. And Lucci doesn't really have that, but he is obviously kind of a prodigy that's being taken advantage of in a world that just is brutal in a way that is not really long-term very smart, in my opinion. And that lines up for me. Let's see. Gus says, now the flag is the world government. It's either coincidence that he got the scar in that way, or he already had that scar. Oh, I misunderstood, because they like superimpose the flag over his back in that scene. And it seemed to suggest, the way that it was animated, that that's where the design for the flag came from. Okay, so I got that wrong. Gus says the world government's definition of justice and this king's definition of justice are in conflict. The king seems to care about his people. The world government doesn't negotiate with pirates under any circumstances. No, I get that. I mean, that part's obvious. I'm talking about like the fact that the king would be the one to punish then, because the king is the one who ultimately made the call. And we don't see the king get punished. We see his men get punished. And the king, as far as we know, that nothing happened to him, unless it was mentioned and I didn't catch it. So it just feels like a weird way to enforce it, that you're going to like punish dudes who probably swore fealty to this guy for doing what they were told, when I think that, similar to the other things they're really unreasonable about, the world government would be like, I can't believe you swore fealty to this king to do what he told you, and when he said to surrender, you didn't. It seems like it would be a real easy thing for them to set these guys up as the fall guys there too, because when you're a little person, I don't mean physically, you are at the disposal of folks in power to kind of pin whatever on you, you know? So anyway, all of that to say that the world government is a bunch of loonies, and I don't know what's going on with each of these captains, but they all need therapy. They've all been like brainwashed to a degree that is like truly impressive. I can't decide how many of them really buy into this and how many of them are just doing what they need to do to stay in power, because like Spandam is obviously a power hungry maniac, but Spandam doesn't talk about justice really. All he talks about is how much he can't wait to torture Robin, and how excited he is to like see her despair over the Buster call. There is nothing in any of his speeches that I remember where he really harps on the fact that she has to pay for her crimes in any way that sounds like it's rooted in real belief. It all is just sort of the rigmarole to continue with mentally intimidating her, really. So I'm wondering about these other guys, and if it's just about holding on to power, I actually can understand that more than I can understand actually buying into this. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. All right, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Appreciate you all a lot. Thank you, Gus, for feeding me some information here. And thank you, Bernadette, for commissioning this one. I will see you all soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.